Greetings, everybody, wherever in the world you are watching from. My name is Dimitar Zakhariev, and I would like to welcome you to the SLOT conference. In the next minutes, you will get an update by the members of the SLOT board on what this group is currently working on and what are the focus areas of the board in 2022. I would like to introduce our panelists today. We have Fred Wister from Nordic Slot Coordination, Günther Heinrich from Fraport, Robert Wood from Sydney Airport, Anthony Chan from Hong Kong Express, and Seth Pellissier from EasyJet. Thank you all for making the time in your busy agenda to participate in this panel. I would like to start by asking what are the topics that the SLOT board is working on at the moment? Günther, Seb, a working group was created to discuss the double 80-20 policy during the last couple of months and is currently working on the justified non-use of slot policy review. Can you provide an overview of what work has been done so far by this group?
Sure. Do you want to go first, Günther?
Please. I should go. Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, well, Dimitar, thank you very much. Yeah, we have a working group on that topic. In fact, it's not a new topic. It's always ongoing for a long time already. It's the double 80-20, or some refer to it as the so-called double dip. You all know it's not appreciated by the airport, and as a matter of fact, it's not appreciated by most of the coordinators, and as a matter of fact, it's not applied by most of the coordinators. Airlines think they still need this flexibility to get the historics. It's a debate for a longer time already ongoing, and I hope we will come to an end of this discussion so that we come to a final conclusion with that. Flexibility is a key word, it seems to be currently right now. And that's why we extended the scope of that working group, that we should include the application of Genus as well, because this is something which might provide the flexibility airlines needed or not. This is where we are in the current process. It's a lively debate, and I hope we can end this debate soon, because there's something in the guidelines right now which is not applied by the majority of coordinators. And I think this is a fact we have to tackle. That please.
I think following on from Günther, I think that's a pretty good opening synopsis. To pick up on Günther's point, it's a contentious working group, to say the least. It's been rather heated, but I think that works quite nicely. Actually, having that disagreement means that eventually we work together to find a middle ground that works certainly for the airlines and airports, and is easy for the coordinators to administer. I think from the airlines' perspective, although it may not be used by as many coordinators as we'd like it to be, I think the issue is that it is used by some coordinators, and some of those coordinators that apply it are in the busiest and most congested airports for airlines, and that after years of having had a system in place, it's not as easy as just scrapping it and losing that flexibility. Airlines have come to rely on that flexibility it provides, especially when we come around holiday times. And the reason that we brought 8.8 into the conversation, and that the original scope has been widened from just 8722 is that actually that flexibility piece around defining what operation and commercial cancellations and differentiating between the two in order to look at removing 8722 needs to be addressed, and to ensure that there's that continuity of flexibility in the airports, in those airports where we were using the double 80-20. So we've made it feels like we made no progress, but actually I think we've made good progress as a group. I think it's as both Günther and myself are alluded to, it's a very heated and contentious topic, but we will get there, and I think we're making progress bit by bit. So watch this space.
Yeah, and Sam, if I may add, I guess it's very helpful, this kind of discussion, even if there might be some kind of disagreement. But this brings us to the core of the system. It's the historic rights, it's 80-20, and the discussion, this 20% buffer, what is it for? Is it for just for commercial cancellation? Does it include technical cancellations as well? So it's very good from time to time to discuss and to be aware of the core of the system. So yes, it's very heated, but I think it's very helpful for all of us.
Yeah.
If I may add from the coordinator's side also that it is a very interesting work going on there, and as was also pointed out, there are different approaches from different coordinators on this issue. So I think it's very important that we all can sit together to try to find out what is the best common practice on this, and whether that is to take it away or whether to have some kind of a double dip. But I think it's very important that we have it on the table, that we are discussing it openly. So everybody knows the different standings here.
I think it really surmises to me what the slot board is about. You know, we in a post, getting towards a post-COVID world, and the slot board being able to then focus on something that thankfully isn't COVID related and have we can actually address some wider policy issues that are affecting all three stakeholders. And I think we can have that discussion as a group and thrash out the differences that we see on a global basis to try and find commonality and positions that work, like I said, work for the airlines and airports and are able to be implemented by coordinators in a more unified and global manner. And I think that's where we're aiming to get to with this. And this is one of the first projects, I think, as a slot board that we've actually worked on that doesn't have COVID in the title, which is really nice, as well as being heated and of course meaning we all, everything gets a little bit emotional. It's nice that it's not emotional about COVID, so there's positivity even within that, but just surmising that point, that the disagreement and the not having a commonality in the first instance will lead us to compromise and to finding a solution as three stakeholders.
Thank you for that update. It's really interesting to hear what actually the slot board is doing at the moment, and I suppose that's going to be something that the slot board will continue to provide updates to the rest of the community. I would like now to move to another topic. The slot board recently created a working group to look at what the slot relief measures for the upcoming summer 22 season could be. And this group is still exploring different ideas and concepts that could be implemented. But I would like to ask Anthony if you could give us a high-level overview what that group has been discussing at this stage in time.
Yeah, thanks, Dimitar. That's a pretty good question you're bringing to the table, because if you look at the past two seasons, summer 21 and now winter 21, the number of coordinators and regulators taking up the WASB recommendation has actually increased. I think what that really means to us is that regulators around the world and also coordinators around the world are looking to the board for guidance, and they must have found it to strike a good balance between all three of us, the three industry stakeholders, responding together to a rapidly changing situation, which I think is really the essence of the WASB, and we all should be quite proud of that, like Seb and the others has said just now. Now, looking ahead to summer 22, I think there's general agreement within the industry that we're still a long way to go before we can get to a level of unconstrained global or international travel, and that it will be still a very bumpy and uneven process, and we can really see that right in front of our eyes, borders are opening and then closing. Quarantine restrictions are changing. not just for passengers but also for crew. We're seeing that, you know, just over the last few days. And then there are routes that are you know, being opened on sort of like a travel link process or framework, but then these are only designated to certain airlines by the authorities. And what I think is causing all of this unevenness, and the key word here is uneven in recovery, is that countries are all taking different strategies when it comes to reopening, or I guess not reopening in some cases. So what we've seen are you know, some countries are rolling out their live with COVID roadmaps. Some are rolling out these roadmaps faster than others. Some are slower, and there are some who don't even have a roadmap at this stage and are still very conservative with their restrictions. So I think what this can really be summarized as is everything is so hard to predict. Because, you know, looking back, you know, a few months or earlier in this year, earlier in the pandemic, we were looking at vaccination rates as sort of like an indicator of when restrictions might be lifted for a given country or for a given region. But now we're beginning to see that, you know, this might not necessarily be, there might not be, you know, a linear correlation between the two. You know, you might have some countries who have a high vaccination rate but are still choosing to not open up, at least compared to others. And really it is because of exactly that, you know, because of exactly what I've just talked about, that one of the options that we are looking at within the group, within the working group, is, you know, is there a, you know, is there feasibility that the group can recommend an approach where we look at slot alleviation on a route by route basis? Because, you know, let's be honest, you know, all of us here, you know, we're sitting in different parts of the world, and restrictions to us can be very different, you know, and we're at a stage where we're seeing countries diverge from each other in terms of their COVID policies since the very beginning of the pandemic, and we can no longer rely on a blanket recommendation like we have done in our recommendation in the past two seasons. So, you know, very initially, we're now looking at perhaps looking at a matrix approach where we can say, okay, you know, if this happens, and then this is what we need to do as our recommendation, and so on. I mean, it's still very much work in progress by all of us here, but, you know, like I've mentioned last time, the beginning of the pandemic is the easy part, you know, because, you know, all the countries were closed, and alleviation, blanket alleviation, was a no-brainer. But the difficult part is now, because, you know, we're beginning to have to navigate through an uneven path to recovery. So yeah, that's what we are looking at the moment in terms of summer 22 alleviation.
Thank you, Anthony. Would anybody else like to add anything, and in terms of what the slot board is perhaps looking at?
I think I'd just like to echo what Anthony said, that we're in a very complex environment at the moment. Obviously, we were joking before the call that I'm coming to Rome to the slot board from New South Wales, the state that I live in, from Sydney, but I can't travel to parts of my own country at the moment. So the recovery is going to continue to be patchy. It's going to continue to ebb and flow based on changes to border restrictions and changes to rules. So I think it's extremely helpful, and has been extremely helpful, to try and get some sort of balance and sort of rules and frameworks that that can help as a starting point to discuss how we all move forward and what we recommend in terms of that consistency that we're all seeking. We're all seeking it. It's one thing to seek it, it's another to find it. It is, as we know, it's a difficult thing for governments to align globally when the circumstances are so different locally. So I think the work that the WASB has done over the course of COVID has been really important in setting an important baseline and the signal for that consistency in the discussion. But I think we all recognise in our own individual circumstances that it's probably going to take another season, perhaps 2 seasons, before we really get to that consistent approach. But it's still very helpful, even if local rules are different, to have something to refer to as a starting point for the discussion.
Yeah, and I just also want to add my agreement to what is already said, and from the coordinator's point of view also, you can see that the situation in Hong Kong, in Australia, and in Norway, where I am sitting now, it's very, very different situations and with very much differences in the regulation on travel and border crossings. And that's where the WASP is a very important tool for the whole industry, that we can talk together on a worldwide basis and then get our own views known to the others, so that I know what's going on in Hong Kong and in Australia, as well as the opposite way. So that I think the WASP has a very important role here in playing as the field where we can exchange the views and the experiences that we all have in our different regions also.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Fred. Now, maybe looking into the nearest future, the slot board has put together a plan for a work program for next year, for 2022, with the intention to review some priority areas and move away from just looking at the most immediate and urgent issues that were so far COVID related. The slot board had looked at some broad themes to work on, and these are the improvement of availability and accuracy of information and use of slot data, a topic related to noise limitations that impact capacity, and a review of the minimum series length. So I think it would be very interesting for our audience to know what specific issues and challenges will the board address by looking at these areas. I would like to start asking Fred if you could elaborate a little bit more on what will the board look at with regards to the availability of information and the use of airline slot data.
Yes, thank you very much, Dimitri, and thank you for letting me have this chance to say something about this. We have been through a pandemic, and much of the world are still struggling with the pandemic. And what we learned also is the need of information and the role of the information, because during the pandemic, of natural reasons, the information came late on the actual and the realistic schedules. However, so the pandemic demonstrated the need that we all have for the information and the needs of the data. And up to date, airline data plays an important role for planning the resources, and that scope is an issue both for the airlines, for the airports, and everybody else that are involved. And the objective of this group is then to identify what kind of airline slot data and airport capacity data that is needed, and for what purpose we need it. What is the right source of information for the specific data, and at what time in the planning process is the data needed? I think the scope for this group is most easily defined as the best use of the slot data by all the industry stakeholders, as I said, airlines, airports, in this sense. And for this purpose, the WASP should develop a set of kind of minimum worldwide requirements, including the online availability of the data, and also from the coordinator side, and having online possibilities, and that will be the best way forward to put this kind of information on towards all the players in the industry, including then, of course, airline and airports. What the WASP should do for this is to define the most adequate process to share the data, and also to discuss and explore the appropriate tools that should be used for the exchange of the data to avoid inefficiencies that we derive from the lack of information or where we have outdated information. So the importance is to have the most updated and the most easily accessible, transparent data from the coordinator, and then give that on towards the airlines and the airports for the common use of all of us. I think that is the scope and how we should try to get this into some kind of a system and a standard, a minimum standard at least. Because we know, of course, that we are at different levels all over and work from different systems and so on. But this will be a common ground to work on the exchange of the data that will help all the stakeholders here. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Sounds very, very interesting area. Would anybody like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would like to pick up on that. I think a very important outcome of this working group is the creation of the working group itself, because this gives us the opportunity to explain a little more how important individual data are for airports. So over the years, I attended several working groups and with very good discussions with airliners and coordinators. And it turns out that sometimes it's not known by our colleagues what the importance of individual data are, and it's very important to have an exchange on that. So, for example, sometimes it's not enough for an airport to know the generic aircraft type, which is enough for the coordination process. But sometimes we need the very specific aircraft type because the wind tips clearance of the aircraft is different, even with the same generic aircraft type. But this could cause another stat allocation. Sometimes it's feasible, sometimes it's not. So I would like to use the opportunity to explain all the needs and which details we need to know idly up front. Of course, we know we could not have all when we need it, but at least we should raise the awareness how important these data are and how important it is accurate. And it becomes very obvious during the pandemic, when it was very obvious that the slot allocation, when you just look at the slots which were allocated, they will definitely not reflect the real traffic. But this was a challenge to find out, because then we could adjust our resources to that and could do some cost saving for the benefits of all of us. So I'm very keen to see what the positive outcome of the working group will be, but at least the creation of the working group and the opportunity to have a detailed exchange of our needs, this will already be very, very helpful, I guess.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, Ginter, that it's very interesting in that sense that we can get the issues on the table. What is the problems you are looking at? Because much of what you said is like, for instance, the aircraft type and the versions, whether you have a wingtip on a 757 or not, gives you another ICAO code. And for instance, for my airport, it's very important, and they are asking for the equipment changes. So we have a lot of equipment changes every day going through the system. So
this is a really interesting topic, and I've worked at a number of airlines and now working on the airport side of things. Sometimes there is, I don't want to say a kind of mistrust about the sharing of information, but there needs to be clarity about why information is required and how it is shared, and the process needs to be effective, ideally not creating extra work for the airlines, because we appreciate, if we look through the COVID lens in particular, I don't envy any airline anywhere, their network or scheduling team having to manage through the constant barrage of changes that COVID was throwing up. And so the kind of desire to streamline that process in a more normalized environment and get to a process that gives airlines confidence that their data will be used for appropriate purposes and in the right way and in a transparent way, but at the same time that it's shared in a timely fashion so that airports can make important planning decisions, resource allocation decisions, and ideally save costs for airports and airlines through that process. I think that's a really productive discussion, a really important discussion. It has been a challenge through COVID, there's no doubt about that. I think it's shone a light on the need for cooperation, if nothing else, the need for this topic to be discussed about in a more business as usual context, how you get that balance right, so that it's not adding hours to people's days ideally, but that the information flows are accurate and timely because they do have impacts.
And I think just to follow on from that, Rob, and the comment that Gunther made, actually it's really interesting to hear, and I think it's important for airlines to understand the needs of an airport in order to deliver that service to us, because having the wrong aircraft show up, has an impact on all the users at an airport if you're not expecting it. But I think actually it's a really important topic because it starts even before we get to the allocation of that slot. Actually, the free flow of information and that feedback loop is really important, from the declaration of capacity, the availability of capacity, on which airlines base schedules and what we're intending to do in the future. And I think one thing that COVID has shone a light on, if we were going to take some positivity away from this, is it has shown us where the weaker elements, not just of the allocation and sharing of the slot data, but the wider capacity process, shall we say, and the way that capacity is declared and what is available is shared with airlines, knowing that in order for us to pump out a schedule that is accurate to allow planning of an airport, we have to start with the base, we have to have that foundation. So I think it's a really important and a really interesting topic. And to your point, Rob, the collaboration that it should foster for the greater good of everyone, and an outcome that is felt by everyone should be phenomenal. It should be really good. I think it's exciting times. What will come out.
I agree. And I think there's a win-win in all of this as well. I think there's a real opportunity to save costs, to improve efficiencies at airports and for airlines operating to those airports, and cost. So I think it's a really important topic for discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. It seems this group is going to be quite exciting times ahead. So Robert said, let's move on to the other working group that the slot board will create for looking at in 2022. It is a group on minimum series length. Can you give us a little bit more information what that group will actually work on?
Do you want to go first, Rob? I always feel that, I seem to be on all the contentious talk about all the really contentious groups. So it's nice.
I'll defer to you, Seb, because you politely let Gunther go first last time. So I'll defer to you.
I was joking. Look, I think one of the working groups and areas of focus for the slot board in summer 22 is looking at whether the current series length that we have in place is still the right thing to do, whether or not it still works in today's world, and whether it incorporates and accounts for the different demands that is seen from airlines, the different airport profiles, and clearly it's going to be another interesting area where there'll be conflicting views between airlines and airports, but I think it's something that has to be addressed. It's one of these burning questions, I think, that's been around for pre-slot board creation. I think and these are things that we shouldn't be shying away from. We should hit these big important policy pieces head on. I think we, as a slot board, will need to put in place, we're already talking about a way that would approach this by using data to understand what the impact is on airline scheduling, airline networks. Clearly, Rob will talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about the impact on airports and the use of their scarce capacity, especially in those more congested airports. from an airline side, I fear there may even be conflicting views from the airline community. You know, we have very different business models with very different needs and wants. So it's good, you know, that this will be discussed both at slot board level, but brought back down to SPWG, and I'm sure ACI will bring it down to their SPWG equivalent to discuss. So I think it's something that needs to be discussed. It's going to be tough and unpleasant, I'm sure, as talking about 8722 has been, but this is the purpose of the slot board, is to tackle these contentious items with the three stakeholders on board. Clearly, you know, there's going to be a coordinator impact and view here as well. Systems have been geared up and built around this stuff. I think one of the biggest hurdles we've got to climb actually is legislation that we see across the world. You know, we can change the WASG, but really we need to understand the basis of legislation when it comes to minimum series length across all states and continents, and actually how that then may influence and impact decisions. We want the WASG to be a global guideline. We want everybody to really follow it. And in an ideal world, regulators would use it as the basis for any regulation. It's nice to think big. So hopefully we can start to tie it all in. But yeah, I leave it to you, Rob. I don't want to give away the game too much and get myself lynched at a conference by my airline colleagues for saying things.
Look, I think it's a great summary. So this is one of those topics that that is really important to steer into. You know, we know there are differing views on. We know has been a challenge for a number of years. If I selfishly take the Sydney context, you know, as a level 3 congested airport, we have a number of local rules that also flow into series length and impact series length. Being on the other side of the world, our summer holidays and the northern winter sort of season are misaligned, so we have some local rules around that have implications for series length. We have some specific regional rules that have impacts on series length. And what we see from a data perspective for our airport, just selfishly again speaking for our airport, is a lot of trapped slots. And I think it's a really interesting thing if we look at the topic we just discussed around information exchange and information flows and series length. To me, the issue is sort of one and the same. It's how do you obtain the maximum efficient use of scarce infrastructure, and good information, transparent information, and series length are connected. Perhaps part of the solution lies in that transparent exchange of information so that we can fill in some of the gaps and avoid some of those trapped slots, ideally through the process. I fully agree with Seb's point that different airlines, different business models, have implications on the operation. So it's not every airline that can operate a perfectly harmonised, daily schedule at exactly the same time of day for a season or for the full year. We know that history has kind of taught us that many times. So this is a really important topic. It's a topic that I think will generate a lot of conversation, and good conversation, because again, if we go back to why the WASB was formed, it's to tackle issues like this. It's to see if there is a way to make incremental improvement on how we set a baseline for discussions around these topics. So it's one that we'll be paying very close attention to, because, as I said, there are some local rules in Sydney that exacerbate the issue here, but I think globally it's one that is an important topic of conversation next year.
And I think, Rob, that I think to me surmises why the slot board, and picking up on something Fred said earlier, why it works and it's so important, is because this is going to be a contentious and difficult issue, and it isn't going to be a one size fits all for everybody. But actually, by bringing together the global experience, of airlines and airports from around the world, different views, different rules, different experiences, and different understandings, it puts us in a better position. It stands us in good stead to find that middle ground and to find something that may work for everybody. And I think that's the joy of this group, and it is bringing those experiences together. I
agree with that, Seb, and I think sometimes there may be a sense that the slot board is going to come up with a perfect solution to all these issues. I mean, the way I view it, is that if we can make incremental improvement along the way, if we can learn from best practice in different parts of the world, if we can take ideas, exchange ideas, and we're never going to get to perfect, but if we can get to something better, if we can have that incremental improvement, for me, that's the purpose of the board.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
would
definitely agree. I think the good thing about this is, these are always going to be difficult discussions, but the good thing is we are putting these, on the table and discussing it. And I think the fact that we have different operator types and different geographic locations in the group allows us to sort of leave no stone unturned in the discussion. So, for example, in some cases, I find that having some kind of flexibility given to the airlines allows smaller airlines to grow. And these are the things that we really need. And what I think so far we've shown is that not everything is as one-sided as we initially thought. So that platform really gives us to look at everything from all aspects within the group.
I think it's important just now to remember what is the main purpose of coordination. It is the best possible use of the scarce capacity so that no capacity is lost. That is the ultimate goal of the coordination process.
And I guess I would like to echo Seb, who said, well, there is regulation in place, and of course, this is only guidelines we are talking about, but it's not only guidelines. Well, someone has to start, and especially in Europe, we have a very strong and very specific slot regulation, and the series length is defined in this European slot regulation. But I'm not afraid if we agree on something different on a worldwide level, that we start lobbying this idea in Europe as well, because in Europe, in the next year, we will have a revision process started about the European slot regulation. And if we have some input from a worldwide level, this would be very helpful. And this, we have to be, I do not know about your experience with dealing with regulators and their expertise in the slot business and so on. We have a very extensive experience here in Europe, and they are not all experts discussing these topics, and that doesn't make it easier. So this is the beauty of the slot board. We are all really experts. We know what we are talking about, and and we do not have different ideas we have to take into account. So if we agree on a worldwide level on something, this has really its strengths in the world and will influence the regulations worldwide. And this is, again, the beauty of the slot board. One last point regarding the series length. I guess the definition is there from the beginning. This is from the middle of the 70s, so it's more than 50 years old already, the definition of that. The world was different in that time. There was no super congested airports. There weren't so many airlines, so many different business models. So and it's really time to discuss these core definition. If it's still fit for purpose, is it still is it still okay to meet what the world needs? There are already some examples where airports tried to change it, which failed because it was not in line with the European slot regulation. We had that in Gatwick, there was Innsbruck and Dublin. So there are definitely a need to discuss that and maybe to change it. So thank you.
I think there's just one final thing from me, picking up on what Gunter said, and about, I think everybody's echoed that same point about the conversation and taking place. I think maybe to reassure everybody, airlines and airports alike, just because we're discussing things, it doesn't necessarily mean that at the end of it we'd be advocating for something changing. I think the point is that we have to have the discussion, and we have to do the work, and we have to look at the data, and we have to look at the impact of current processes and current guidance within the WASG and its impact on airlines and airports, and indeed other elements of the entirety of the WASG before coming to a conclusion. So I think everything that gets discussed doesn't necessarily lead to a change. Everything is being reviewed to make sure, to Gunter's point, that it's still fit for purpose. I think some things get better with age. and some things don't, and there'll be elements of the WASG, much like me, that have got better with age, and there'll be elements that won't have done. And so I think it's probably just to reassure everybody that just because the slot board are discussing a topic doesn't mean that the end result is going to be advocating for change. It needs to be reviewed in a methodical, data-driven and impact analysis way. That doesn't make any sense, but to make sure that we're ensuring the WSG is fit for purpose going forwards, and that it maintains its relevance in an ever-changing world.
Well, it seems that this topic is going to be again very interesting, and it will definitely keep the slot board and the WOOC group busy throughout 2022. And now, last but not least, the third potential working group, I would like to ask Günther and Anthony to provide us a little bit more on that, knowing that environmental restrictions and the environment is high on the agenda, and those issues are really encompassing the whole aviation industry. And the slot board discuss some areas that have impact on slots, and whilst it's recognized that slots are not the solution to the environmental problems, they are impacted by the potential environmental restrictions. So Günther, Anthony, what sort of noise-related issues could be under discussion under this very broad theme? Very briefly, if you can.
Okay, Anthony, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think as an industry, we recognize that the noise impact is a big concern, especially when it comes to getting approvals to build much needed new runways for additional capacities and so on. But we need to also discuss is putting a plain and simple cap on, say, for example, aircraft movement at night. Is that the best way forward? Or does the industry need to have exhausted all other options in terms of noise abatement measures before implementing any kind of operating restrictions in place? And if we do put operating restrictions in place, do we then should we consider the fact that we have newer aircraft coming in these days, now quieter than ever than they used to be? So perhaps is there a way forward where we can actually look at the actual noise that the aircraft type is making, taking that into consideration, and then thereby perhaps allowing some kind of growth, which of course is much needed in slot congested airports, some kind of growth to the movement that perhaps comes from the level of noise that has been reduced by some operators replacing older, noisier aircraft with newer, quieter aircraft. Is essentially funding growth, from the noise that has been given up. And and then you look further. If there is, in case of any ban on certain aircraft types, can the group, all three of us here, discuss whether there's a recommended sort of like a progressive approach or a manner in which we phase in certain implementation in terms of aircraft ban, so that airlines can at least have time to adapt their network or their aircraft plans to have time to work on their network.
Thank you, Anthony.
I guess Anthony said it perfectly already. What has to be considered? It's called proposed by ICAO, the ICAO balance approach. So, of course, the easiest answer to noise is to have no air traffic. That's the easiest answer. But this is something I think it's not that acceptable. So there are more than just having night bands or something like this. There are other opportunities which have to be balanced, like the land planning queues, having flight operations, taking into account the latest technology of aircraft noise to reduce noise at the source already. So all these are criteria which have to be balanced and taken into account when making decisions on some noise limitations, on limitations for the movements. So, and maybe we can give some guidance on that and give more clarity to regulators how this topic could be approached. It is, and it becomes more and more a very important topic for all the airports, especially when we operate very close to dense area. Look at Heathrow, for example. It would become a nightmare, I'm sure, to have all these noise restrictions that are discussed. And in dense areas, you will get no approval, that's for sure, to extend your runway, to build a new runway without having additional noise restrictions or something like this. For example, this was in the past already well, what we have to accept in Frankfurt to get the approval for our latest runway, we had to accept that we get a night ban. So what's clear by the politicians, if we do not accept the night ban, we will not get the runway. So it's something that will happen everywhere.
Thank you, Günther.
I think this is again a complex topic. You know, as we're recording this, we have the backdrop of COP26. We're talking about noise at the moment, but obviously noise, emissions, and a range of other environmental considerations are interlinked in these discussions. And at Sydney Airport, we're heavily restricted in relation to a range of noise outcomes, and you know, that's a balance and a challenge. And I think the main purpose of the slot board, looking at incremental improvements to efficiency and how you allocate scarce capacity, you know, there is obviously a confluence between noise outcomes and efficiency outcomes and the operations of airports and airlines. So I think it's an important discussion. It's obviously a discussion that happens in a broader context than just the WASB. So we recognise the small role we may play in inputting into that discussion, but I think it's an important topic.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Rob. And now I think we have 5 more minutes left from our very interesting panel. And a question to Rob and Fred, really. It seems that the slot board is embarking on a quite ambitious program of work for next year. Can you explain how the working groups are expected to work, and perhaps how can one of our colleagues get involved? Because obviously we would need input and help from all slot experts involved in slots. Thank you.
Yes, I could start on that, and it's very, as everybody can understand, it's not possible for the members of the WASP to man all these working groups, and we need the help of all the airport, airline, and coordinators that are interested to take part in the groups that they actively can contribute. And we welcome everybody to come forward to the secretariats or to ourselves, and we can explain more about the work and what is expected in this context. And it's very important that we bring aboard as many people as possible from all over the world, so that we can represent all parts of the aviation industry in all the, is it 5 or 6 continents? And so please come forward and feel free to ask any of us about any questions about taking part in the working groups.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, Fred. Just a couple of things from me. These working groups take a lot of time and a lot of work. There's no doubt about that. If we're going to do things properly, to pick up on Seb's point, They need to be data driven. They need to be analytical. There needs to be robust debate and follow through on, you know, items that that are thrown up for discussion. There's a lot of work, and we shouldn't shy away from that. And I know myself that in my own team, there's a lot more technical expertise and domain knowledge on a range of these topics than I have. So it's important that we draw on that deep technical expertise. It's important that we draw on regional expertise and knowledge, and that we are looking for that balance of technical expertise and people who are good at finding that middle ground, good at, you know, looking at the data, analysing the data, and identifying ways forward, because it's very easy to find reasons not to do something. The hard thing and the challenge is to find a way forward that balances outcomes, and that's really what we're seeking, is that mix of technical expertise and an open mind to incremental change that I talked about before.
Thanks very much, Fred and Rob. And I'm sure our audience would appreciate this very detailed insight on what the slot board does, and all the dynamics and the different issues that the slot board is looking at. So thank you again very much for taking the time to explain all these bits and pieces that create this slot board and the work that it does. I would like now to wish everybody who's going to be in Rome a very successful conference. Those who cannot travel for one reason or another, again, wish you a successful conference via the virtual facilities that are provided. And for those who are in Rome, it will be a great opportunity to see everybody, each other face to face after a two-year break. So we really look forward to seeing you, everybody, as one big team.
Thank you,
so much.
Thank you very much, Dimitri.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Demeter.
Thanks,
Thank
all.
you very much.
Thanks.
Take care.